Hello, my name is Cullen Thompson, and today we will be talking about implicit bias in the hiring process that occurs at countless companies across the country. We will discuss what implicit bias is and how it can impact many minority groups in America. Before we start the presentation, we must first look at the definition of implicit bias. The following definition states implicit bias slash unconscious bias, or an implicit stereotype, is the unconscious attribution of particular qualities to a member of a certain social group. Implicit stereotypes are shaped by experience and based on learned associations between particular qualities and social categories, including race and/or gender. We mostly witness implicit bias towards ethnic people in America. However, ethnic people are far from the only people experiencing this. Some other groups of people included are aging workers, plus-size workers, and people with physical disabilities. Examples are a man in a wheelchair. According to NAIS.org, they've stated about how 3/4 of respondents in each of the 5 racial groups, including biracial, demonstrated some degree of implicit bias. Roughly equal levels of implicit bias were found among men and women, old and young, Republicans and Democrats with the same racial background had also similar levels of underlying racial bias. The central question we must ask ourselves about implicit bias is, what is the best way to reduce or completely eliminate any form of implicit bias from occurring in the workplace? In the following 3 slides, we will look at several reasons for why implicit bias may occur. The first example of implicit bias comes from minorities with 2 ethnic-sounding names. This is also known as ethnicity cues, and this results in many of these ethnic people being less likely to receive a callback from a potential employer. Another example to describe implicit bias is known as the taste-based discrimination theory, which talks about how potential candidates with lower economic standings are viewed in a lower standard by their employers, which can reflect negatively on them during the hiring process. The third example of implicit bias comes from the employer or manager being from the majority ethnic background and comparing their characteristics and experiences with minority members. The perceived dissimilarity leads to negative attitudes and behavior toward minority members. This is known as the relational demography theory. Now we will take a look at some of the reasons that implicit bias should be eliminated in the workplace. The first reason why bias should be reduced is that with a reduced bias towards other ethnic groups, it can help promote diversity and can lead to many new opportunities within a company. The graph below also illustrates why diversity is important. It shows how little minorities have representation in companies across America. Many managers should care about implicit bias and should seek to understand bias. If they learn more about it and identify it, then they could reduce the chances of this happening in the workplace. The final reason that managers should seek out to reduce bias is because the managers are potentially missing out on extremely qualified candidates and many times failing to seize their opportunities. We will now look at 3 causes of implicit bias in the following slides. Cause 1. Poor training for managers. Many managers receive poor training and do not realize they are playing into implicit biases. Lack of accountability. Managers sometimes aren't held to proper standards. In-group favoritism is where managers choose candidates that they identify with, rather than qualified people. Stereotypes and false assumptions. Managers have been known to choose people based off the stereotypes that they have heard, whether they are accurate or not. The next 3 slides, we will take a look at 3 potential solutions to eliminate bias. Standardized interviews. Having a structured interview could show how people can directly focus on the factors that impact performance. Setting targeted recruitment and creating diversity goals within your company or organization. By making this issue front and center, it will motivate employers to focus on reaching these goals. By creating anonymization in resumes can also help. By making resumes anonymous or having white resumes can aim to conceal some key personal identifiers. In conclusion, we have looked at how implicit bias can have an impact on many people who are trying to get hired within an organization. We looked at some of the reasons for this, and it is up to everyone to take part in holding each other accountable for eliminating implicit bias. Now here are my works cited. Thank you for listening to my presentation.